All right, time to get some hate mail. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi. Today we're going to be talking about more rules in Warhammer 40,000 that everybody gets wrong. I said I wasn't going to do another one of these, but new codexes and new rules have come out in the last couple of months that have really brought a lot of the odd core mechanics of Warhammer 40,000 to the fore, or changed some of those core mechanics, and there's still a lot of confusion out there. So I figure I would talk about some of those important rules and how they're meant to be played, and then you can play the cleanest and nicest games of Warhammer 40,000 of your life. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this style of content and you like my Warhammer 40k videos, go ahead and drop a like, drop a subscribe on the video. It really helps me out, and let's get into it. First off, let's talk about bracketed keywords. This is a rule specifically from the Warzone Nachmund GT 2022 packet. This is the 40k format that's the most common form for matched play games and especially for competitive play. So if you play at any kind of tournaments or organized play, you probably got to know this one. In Warzone Nachmund, it was decided that Subfaction Supplice that brought multiple different subfactions in your army, things like Astra Militarum regiments or Space Marine chapters or Tyranid high fleets, were no good, and Games Workshop wanted you to take as few of those as possible, so basically to concentrate all your army into a single subfaction. The way they did this was by restricting your selection of bracketed keywords. They call these selectable keywords, and this is basically a keyword like the bracket chapter keyword. So when you build a Space Marine army, all of your units, or at least your generic units like tactical squads or Primaris intercessors or Redemptor dreadnoughts, all have that bracketed chapter keyword. When you add them to your army, you pick a keyword to put in there. So if you wanted to play Imperial Fists, for example, you would say these are going to be Imperial Fists, and you would replace the bracketed chapter keyword with Imperial Fists. In the Warzone Nachmund GT 2022 pack, they've restricted you to only one keyword for each of these selectable keywords. So for example, if you have both Astra Militarum and Space Marines in your army, your Space Marines must all be from one chapter, and your Astra Militarum must all be from one regiment. This means that cross-faction souping is still fine and works like normal. You'll just add those two different factions into your army, probably in different detachments. It may interrupt your army-wide abilities, but other than that, you are good to go. The place that this gets weird are with keywords that are locked in, which are not affected. So these are keywords that do not have those brackets around them. For example, Marneus Calgar does not have the bracket chapter keyword. He has the Ultramarines keyword. So things like special characters and unique units are unaffected by this rule and are good to go. This can create some weird situations, however. So let's talk about a theoretical Space Marine army with multiple chapters in it. You can definitely do this, but one of the two chapters must have only unique units from that subfaction. For example, you take Imperial Fists and you choose that as your bracketed chapter keyword. That's your selectable chapter keyword, and that's the one that you get when selecting this army. And again, to reiterate, if you were adding a different subfaction, so a subfaction that had a different bracketed keyword, so for example, Astra Militarum Regiment, you could select one Astra Militarum Regiment and one chapter. But then you want to add Ultramarines to your army. So you can take a bunch of Ultramarine stuff that doesn't have the bracketed chapter keyword. You can't take Ultramarines that do have that bracketed keyword, since your chapter keyword has to be Imperial Fists, but you can take stuff like Victrix Honor Guard and Tyrannic War Veterans because they don't have that chapter keyword, they only have the Ultramarines keyword. Importantly, this doesn't affect what keywords your detachments have, since that's not how detachments work. Detachment keywords are determined by the shared keywords of all the units inside them, so it's possible to have keywords from multiple different subfactions. You could have, for example, all of those Ultramarines units in an Ultramarines detachment, and then also have an Imperial Fist detachment that has all of those chapter-selected Imperial Fist units. Or, potentially, you could have them all together in one big Adeptus Astartes detachment. Although, in that case, you lose a bunch more abilities, so probably unlikely that you're going to do that. Again, keep in mind that doing stuff like this will probably still break army abilities like Super Doctrines, but this is how you get special characters, and especially things in that new Tau Codex, like Shadow Sun, who is Tau Sept, but because it is not a selectable Sept keyword, she can be brought into lists that aren't necessarily Tau Sept. She just usually comes in a Supreme Command detachment. However, you couldn't, for example, take a Farside Enclaves list and then bring a Cold Star commander from Tau Sept, because that would require you to have two different bracketed keywords, and that's not good. All right, hopefully that didn't melt your brain too much. Let's talk about something that's a little bit less confusing. Let's talk about attacking people with weapons. First off, we'll talk about weapons with multiple attack profiles. There are a lot of weapons in 40k that allow you to attack with more than one profile during the same shooting activation. Some good examples of this are combi weapons that a lot of factions can take that allow you to make a bolter attack in addition to whatever their underslung weapon is. So, for example, if we have a combi flamer, we have a bolter stapled to a flamer, and you can take both a bolter attack and a flamer attack. Now, the first instinct is to treat that model as having both a flamer and a bolter. So you can choose somebody to shoot with your bolter and choose somebody to shoot you with your flamer. There's just the additional penalty of a -1 to hit if you shoot both weapons. But that's not really how it works. When attacking in 40k, the target of your attacks is determined per weapon. And in the case of a weapon with multiple attack profiles, it's one weapon that just has 2 sets of stats to use when it's attacking, meaning that only a single target may be declared for all of its attacks. So, in the case of that combi flamer, you wouldn't be able to, for example, fire the flamer at an enemy infantry unit that's close, and then take your bolt gun shot at another enemy unit that's farther away. You would instead have to shoot both the combi flamer and the bolt gun at the same target, probably the one that's closer. It really makes sense when you think about it because those 2 weapons are stapled together. So if you're pointing them at one person, the bolter's not going to swivel off in a different direction. They're both going to be aiming the same place. This is especially important when you're talking about units like Sagittarum Guard that bring those big underslung Adrastic Destructors on top of their heavy bolter profile. There's a lot of times where you would like to fire all of your 3 damage shots into one target and your longer range 2 damage shots somewhere else, but technically they all must go into the same enemy. Now let's move on and talk about the Big Guns Never Tire and Battlesuit keywords. These 2 rules are written almost identically. Battlesuit units are able to fire their weapons in melee, same with units that can benefit from Big Guns Never Tire, which are monsters and vehicles, so they can basically be discussed together. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is a distinction that has rarely mattered in the past, since it only affects multi-model units, which most vehicles and monsters are not. However, with Battlesuit units being so popular right now, it matters a lot for large units of Tau Battlesuits. When a vehicle or a battlesuit shoots while its unit is engaged, each model has to determine individually whether or not it can attack. Models can only attack enemy units that model is in engagement range of. This means that engaging, for example, a drone on one side of a battlesuit unit can potentially stop an entire battlesuit team from shooting at all if they're unable to pile into the engaging unit during the preceding fight phase. Again, the same goes for vehicles or monsters that use Big Guns Never Tire, but that matters much more rarely since it's very rare that you see a multi-model unit of vehicles or monsters. And it's important to remember as well that the engagement range in this case is 1 inch from each of those models in the unit you're measuring from. The ½ inch within ½ an inch only determines whether or not you can attack in melee. You aren't technically engaged if you're in that ½ inch chain. All right, moving on, we got some more attack things to talk about. Let's talk about automatic hits and automatic wounds. This is an easy one that's often missed, but with a lot of automatically hit and automatically wound effects coming into the game, especially with upgrades like advanced targeting systems and stratagems like Deathwatch's Specialism Extremis that's getting a lot of play these days, it's worth talking about since there is a lot of confusion surrounding this rule. According to the glossary in the core rulebook, attacks that automatically hit or automatically wound are considered to have made a successful hit or a successful wound roll, respectively, even if the weapon profile tells you not to make a hit or wound roll. This matters especially for triggering special abilities or stratagems that key off successful hits or wounds. For example, the mortal wounds from successful wound rolls, like heavy rail rifles that broadsides have, or the hammerhead railgun, will trigger even if that weapon has automatically wounded, and the automatic wounds from Specialism Extremis will trigger even if their attack rolls automatically hit. Some specific events have house ruled against this interaction, but technically that's incorrect. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about fast dice rolling. Now, I'll admit, I got this one wrong at the start of the edition. I played this incorrectly for a long time because it's a super difficult rule to find and compounded by the fact that it's not actually printed in all editions of the core rules. GW is just trying to make it hard on us. When you attack in 40k, you roll all of your hit rolls, then you roll all of your wound rolls, then your opponent takes all of their saves and removes however much damage your attacks did. Right? Technically, no, that's actually not how attacks work. According to the core rules of the game, each attack is fully resolved one at a time, sequentially with hit, wound, save, and damage, before moving on to the next. Unfortunately, 40 play would be a literally unplayable garbage fire of a game that takes 60 years to complete were it to be resolved like that, so the designers have included a workaround. This is a special rule called fast dice rolling, which is basically the system that I touched on earlier, where all your attacks and hits and wounds are being rolled together. You can find the rules for how fast dice rolling works on page 221 of the big copy of the core rulebook. As far as I know, these rules are not included in any of the starter rulebooks or free online PDFs, which is what creates a lot of the confusion surrounding this rule. There are a lot of caveats, however. Firstly, all of the attacks have to have the same profile and special rules. So mixing different weapons together using different colored dice, for example, is technically cheating. In addition, the rules are very explicit that saves and damage rolls must be rolled one at a time after hits and wounds are resolved. 99% of the time, this basically doesn't matter. And you'll see players roll all of their saves together and take damage or remove models based on what they rolled, which isn't technically correct, but is fine and widely accepted because it saves so much time slow rolling all of your attacks on a bunch of idiot infantry you don't really care about. But things get super weird once you introduce rerolls and defensive abilities like Trajan's Moment Shackle or the Tau Empire's stratagem Savior Protocols into the mix. Because saves and damage must be rolled one at a time, if you want to reroll saving throws or damage rolls or use any of those abilities that I just mentioned, you have to roll out your saves one at a time and decide immediately after rolling each individual save whether or not you want to reroll that dice, or just take the damage from the attack. Similarly, damage rolls are rolled and applied immediately after the saving throw is rolled. So the attacker has to determine right then whether or not to reroll a damage roll, if that's applicable. This sequence is super important because you can gain a lot of extra illegal information by rolling all of your saves or all of your damage rolls all together at once. For example, if you need to make 2 saves to survive an attack, and after rolling, you know that you failed 3, that decision to reroll one of those 3 to try to survive is pretty easy, but it's much harder if you fail the first 3 consecutive saves of the roll, since you don't yet know the outcome of the other attacks. You don't know whether or not those saves have been passed or failed, so the decision to reroll one of those first 3 is going to be super tough. Now, I don't blame anyone for not knowing the correct procedure for this one, since it is a tough rule to find, and it has been played differently in previous editions of the game, but it is important for properly resolving those rerolls and defensive abilities in a legal manner. And that's it! I hope you found this video enlightening and can use it to clean up your 40k play in the future and play your games according to the rules. I do want to throw a very quick shout out. I am going to be starting to do live streamed battle reports on the channel every Thursday, so stay tuned to that. We're calling it Throwdown Thursdays, and the first one is going to be Thursday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. I also want to throw a shout out to everybody who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers, all those people are phenomenal, and I love them. And I love you for watching all the way to the end of the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.